afternoon. Welcome to Holy Ascension Orthodox Church. We're very glad that you're here. You can see we have a very close-knit community, and so we are squeezed into the church hall at the moment. You'll have a chance a little bit later on to visit in the church. I think Andrew has planned to give you all a tour during one of the breaks, but we hope that you will feel free to make yourselves at home. A few matters of administration and so forth, administrivia. This room has too much air conditioning. So if you're seated beneath a vent, you will likely get cold, but the alternative is to bake. So if you need to get up and find a new seat at some point, just do so. It's okay, that's what we do around here. At the breaks we'll open the doors, but they're closed right now because the traffic noise will distract you all on that end, and the sunshine on this end will distract you on this end with the bright light. So forgive any atmospheric problems. There's a book table here which has books which may be of interest to you, some on iconography, others on Orthodox Christianity. We invite you to come see them during the breaks, and also our little bookstore which is around the edges. Because it's so tight in here, it's not so easy for us to just keep it, easily accessible, but when we have our breaks, just move the chairs aside and have a look if you like. There are a few things which we hope you will take around the church. You'll see these books that say Alleluia. This has a beautiful introduction to Orthodox Christianity in various different articles, and in the center section tells a little bit about Holy Ascension Orthodox Church. Please take one if you like. There are also some little booklets that say icons on them. This is a description and a plan actually of the iconostasis, the screen of the icons in our church, and a little bit about the iconographer who painted them. Feel free to take those too. It's kind of like there's actually a little schematic of the screen inside, so you can look at it and see what's what if you're not familiar with Orthodox iconography. But we do welcome you and ask you to make yourselves at home. I hope that you will enjoy your afternoon together. Andrew Gould and his wife Julie and others have been making plans for many, many months for this beautiful and great day. The Lord has sent us the most beautiful day in the spring in Charleston. So we're grateful that you all have chosen to be inside learning about sacred iconography as opposed to walking on the beach, which we also could do tomorrow when it will be equally as nice. But thank you all and welcome to our church. Oh, one other thing, while Andrew's taking his place. We'll send this little sheet around. If you would desire to sign it, please do so. It can tell us how to reach you if you would like more information on events similar to this one. Often, once or sometimes twice a year, we have Russian choirs who come and sing amazing concerts here and other lectures like this. Don't feel obliged, but if you'd like to, you can sign and how we can best reach you. And then it will help us to know how you found out about today, so that in case others can benefit from the same kind of advertising, we could do that also. So we'll send it around. Take it or leave it. But thank you.
Hello, I'm Andrew Gould. I am the founder of the Orthodox Arts Journal, which is an online journal which addresses topics like this one, topics related to the Eastern Orthodox liturgical arts. And we have articles posted at least every week, many written by iconographers and other liturgical artisans. So if you're interested in this topic, please have a look at orthodoxartsjournal.org. And this is the first symposium type event that the Orthodox Arts Journal has decided to organize. So we're starting small, but again, if you're interested, please write down your interest and we'll let you know about future events. I'm very excited to have these two iconographers in particular. There's many iconographers in the world. Most of them don't speak English, so that's one advantage we have here. The main advantage we have here is these are two iconographers who are very well immersed in the world of modern art, that is to say, the world of art out in the world. And that's a little unusual for iconographers. That means that they're capable of talking about iconography both in the language of the church's canons and liturgical traditions and in the language of art connoisseurship. And that makes them very interesting speakers, and I think a lot of insights may come out through their talks because of that. I decided to name this event Living Tradition because I think this is a particularly timely topic, not just in the field of iconography, but in our modern American culture in general. Here's what I mean by this. In the era of decades past, let's say the 1930s to the 1970s, the modernist era you might call it, there was a sense that anything old-fashioned, ornamental, in a historical style was not a living tradition, but simply a dead tradition. That is to say, if you were to build a new building that's ornamented and traditional, or paint a new painting that looks like a 19th century portrait, that's just copying an antique style. It's not really art. It's alive. Well, this modernistic idea, fortunately, is finally fading away, and we're in the midst of a revival of all sorts of traditions surrounding us. Traditional architecture is coming back. Old-fashioned ways of American clothing are being revived. Look at the amazing revival of craft beer and whiskeys and so forth. In graphic art, all over the place, you'll see old 19th century looking fonts and very decorative design on event posters and restaurant menus. Downtown, all of the newest, hippest restaurants have kind of a 19th century saloon theme to them. So there's a massive cultural revival, and this revival is saturated with the question of what makes a tradition alive. Just one small example, bourbon. You know, we like bourbon here in the South. Well, what makes a traditional bourbon? People are obsessed with this question. Everybody's bourbon brand has labels, you know, with old-timey names and old-timey pictures, and people accuse them, well, that you're just mass-producing it and you put an old-timey label. Is that really traditional? So then there's other groups of people who are researching 19th century documents from distilleries, trying to figure out how did they do it in the 19th century, because if we do it the same way now, then it's really traditional. And is there room for progress? Is it possible to make bourbon that's better than it was in the 19th century, or is it no longer traditional if you do that? It's a very vexing question. I see articles about this almost every week in the newspaper just related to bourbon. And it's the same in architecture. That's my own field, is architectural design. And this debate in downtown Charleston is huge, because people want traditional buildings that look like Charleston buildings, but there's always a camp of architects who say, no, that's just copying, that's dead tradition, there's no way to make a new traditional building anymore, because this is modern times. There's other architects who say, that's ridiculous. Buildings have always looked that way across many centuries, and we can take those ornamental features that make them look like Charleston buildings, we can design completely fresh new buildings that are really alive, that really reflect us in our age, that are completely traditional, but also of their time in a traditional way. And that's a real interesting argument that's been going on in architecture in recent years. I feel that iconography and the Orthodox Church in general has an opportunity to be a light unto the world in this realm of thought, because the Orthodox Church, her liturgy, and in particular her iconography, has probably the most exacting continuum of tradition over the longest era of time of anything you could find in European Western art. Iconography in the Orthodox Church has remained fundamentally similar in its appearance, in its canon, in its function for about 1,700 years now. And it's been a wonderful process of continual revival. That is to say, in every century, iconographers looked at the best iconography from previous centuries, would revive what's best out of it, always adding something in new that's distinctive of their own country and their own time. And so iconography over the centuries, it's always the same, but it's always different. And that's what makes it a living tradition. There's a core of a canon to it that's unchangeable. That's what's theologically meaningful, the truth it reflects, and the liturgical functions it serves. And then there's something else about it that is changeable, the things that reflect the spirit of the age, the climate, the geography, the culture of whatever country, whatever century it came out of. And the iconographers who are speaking us today, their work in particular exhibits this freshness, that you can look at their work and say, I recognize that that is new, that is something that was painted for us, for our time. It's not a copy of an antique, and yet at the same time it is entirely traditional. It completely conforms to the canon, what really matters, of all the iconography back to the beginning of the church. So as I said, I think we can be a light unto the world in showing the world that yes, it's possible for a tradition to be alive, and it's possible for it to survive millennia, fundamentally intact, and yet still be as fresh now as it was at the very beginning. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Philip Davydov. Philip comes from a family of icon painting. His father is a very well known icon painter in Russia. I met him in Russia 10 years ago, Andrei Davydov. And even 10 years ago and before that, he was painting in a very interesting progressive style of iconography, not exactly following the strict Russian style of iconography that we think of from that part of the world, but bringing in influences from Romanesque, Western European medieval art, and from very early Christian, what you might call archaic or Roman Christian painting, bringing all these things together and painting very interesting, innovative, traditional icons. And Philip Davydov grew up in that milieu in Pskov in Russia, and he also has degrees in art from the University of St. Petersburg, so he has the academic side of it and a living connection to a family tradition of painting, which is very special because iconography had a big interruption in Russia during the Soviet era, and to have a second generation Russian iconographer is for that reason a bit unusual. So I look forward to hearing what he has to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So many beautiful words were said. Afraid. I'm really afraid this place to present in such a special way. But I'll try. And as I was speaking yesterday with my wife by phone, and I said, look, you know, I'm going to have a lecture, but most part of the lecture are the images. And my words are just kind of spice on top. So to help to digest the product, you may need to add some salt. So this is the product, and my words are like trying to be kind of salt for us to digest. So what do you think the time would be for this picture? Medieval. Okay, I would say if somebody of our time would say, look, that's my job, I wouldn't argue much. Because for me, the freshness of the perception comes not from the time, but from the way people make their work. And actually, yes, we have to think about the context, because the context is a very important thing. Iconography, as any other form of art, should be working. It's not made to be decorating the wall. It's not made to be part of just church environment without special meaning. It has a special meaning. It does have to deal with very specific values, just as any other form of art deals with different kind of values. Well, of course, we may find images of 8th century which will be as fresh or even more fresh than we can now afford. Or some images of 21st century which probably, I don't know, may not appear some hundreds years ago. Even if they would be able to make the animation, they probably wouldn't choose them to exist. Well, the question is that what do we want from contemporary iconography to be like? And what do we want it to work like? Because in our time, in one click of the mouse, we have accessible thousands of images. We have accessible all the 2,000 years of the Christian history. of these periods should be the source for our inspiration? Which of the periods of this history deserves to be the best of the world, or deserves to be the only one, or should it be any which we can call to be the best and the worm? Well, I'll just try to make this short introduction because I do think that the iconography is one of the branches, a very important one, and I would say even the most important branch of the visual language, visual literacy of the humanity, but it starts very long ago. So it starts from so simple but so inspiring and intermediate things which we can't really imagine now to be part of iconography, but they are. They started working in the environment where they didn't have much of standardized spaces. So their spaces were all individually created, and they had to deal with the walls. They mostly decorating the walls because panel painting was something too strange. And with the walls and architecture, we have to deal with a special concept of particular relationship between the image and the environment. How are they related? And we see the first examples of how these things are being resolved in ancient Greek world, where the amount of space dedicated to the image is in a very carefully selected balance compared to the rest of the space which is not dedicated to the image. Well, we can go to Greece and see the harmony of everything. We can try to come to them with our own measurements of beauty, and we will fail because for these people they had very concrete understanding of what the beauty is. And after the Greece, with the harmony and beauty of the human being, we may see things like that, and we come to Rome, where harmony of the entire artwork is not so much important as important the individual face, the individual's features, and documentary, I would say, approach to the imagery. So these all are predecessors of the iconography. These are roots, and we can't just go straight to Andrei Rublev without looking at these people. I don't know, that's just something we can't avoid. So this is where the culture of iconography was born. They have already been doing serious things for hundreds of years, and we can't count on that. We can't count on Egyptian culture because we know that lots of influence of cult of death, of how life after the death may happen, the Christianity took from Egypt. And we do know these Fayum portraits, of course, which some of you may have seen in museums. And I would ask you to pay particular attention to what the special goal of the artist might be in this concrete case. So what is the idea of the master creating this portrait? What was his particular preference? Did he want to make this person beautiful? Did he want to make him look rich or intelligent or what? So what particular qualities can we perceive in these images? And first of all, I don't like speaking about the images. I just try to be as technical as possible. But in some particular cases, I would say that when we try to describe this in our human terms, I would say we would speak about some grief dedicated to the understanding of human life, which is ending and things from going forward. So the grief we would see in these Fayum portraits is very special for them, but it's not special for iconography. So yes, we all know perfectly this culture, which really was a rich one, but the time we can start about the icons, we are supposed to start speaking about something subterranean. We are talking about underground world or underground art, which also has to do something with our underground art too. Because what they were doing wasn't official thing. That was something private initiative to create a space for their dead, to create space for possible prayer near martyrs, near their dead. And the funny thing is that these white walls, these decorated walls, actually are the walls of the subterranean caves. So they transformed these caves, which are not supposed to have any electric light, so dark and ugly caves, transformed into paradise. Paradise decorated with wonderful scenes from the Old Testament and New Testament. Well, most of our subjects, which we repeat now for 2,000 years, come from that place. These catacombs, well, many different catacombs in Rome contain images which can't be recognizable now and can be compared with what our time iconographers do. So the Abraham meeting three angels, or Jesus, resurrection of Lazarus, and Moses receiving the commandments. Or let's go forward and see poor Egyptians, which are being sink in the sea. So everything is already made 2,000 years ago. Why should we do something new? Why should we make any effort to pretend that we can do something special and new? And three Hebrew boys in furnace are supposedly the same as 2,000 years ago. So I would say the art of that time is not only helping us to understand what they did believe into, but how the art could work in a human environment. And what I want to admit, as speaking about Fayum, I was saying some words about the grief. Now I would say this kind of art is not supposed to be made for beauty. I don't think they were really caring too much about decorating these images with lots of special, particular kind of, let's say, they weren't polishing them too much. They weren't trying to make them perfect. They just tried to tell us some wonderful and inspired story about their faith. And these wonderful inspired stories often are told with different symbols, which we can learn when we start reading about early Christian art. But my task is to say that this kind of art is not art in our understanding. This should probably be considered rather like something similar to an illustration to the Bible. Something reminding us of special events, but not trying to describe them completely. They don't pretend to make a documentary on the life of St. Paul, or they don't pretend to show how the saints lived. They just created some particular space dedicated to peace, paradise, and joy of their new faith. I would even say these images are childish, but the problem is that we can't repeat childish images, because if your neighbor's child will try to describe you something with his own or her own words, it will be a very special picture which will be faithful to reality, but you will not be able to repeat it without being not sincere, because we can't repeat childish faith. It's something you can't do twice. So for these people, this simplicity of the language was the natural part of their faith. And the images reflected the way they were thinking about God and other sacred matters of their lives. When we start seeing first images in official Christian church, because we know that in 313, Christianity became one of the official religions of Roman Empire, we also see the same sincerity in the images and intermediacy. We are not told that Christ would look beautiful. I would see strange figures with very strange garments which do not look sophisticated or beautiful or nicely painted. But they had some very particular intention doing that. Their intention was to tell us something important. And if we speak about the first churches they were building, they usually are ugly. As these first images are not much beautiful, the churches outside are ugly because that was the attitude of Christians and Christian artists. We are not supposed to work for the external beauty. We rather are meant to be working for the internal beauty. And approaching a building like that, San Vitale a Ravenna, you think like, okay, what kind of, I don't know, warehouse it is. But when you come inside, oh sorry, you are surprised, even with the little which is left, how wonderful the things are. And it's not coming to your mind how expensive they are, even if they were, but first of all, of how wonderful and still childish the understanding of the image for these people was. Because they were not trying to show Christ as a king or emperor or somebody who having power and somebody judging you right now. They were trying to share their joy. Joy shared with the faith. And that's what we see first of all. I do see lots of efforts, yes, but I'm not paying attention to them just because of the main purpose of the painting is this joy. And if we go forward, we see other images like that in different cities, in different churches, but everywhere we will see this simplistic approach and desire to transmit some important information and to share the joy. So they all are beautiful, they all are wonderful, yes, from point of view of our aesthetic understanding. But first of all, these are like childish hymns dedicated to new faith, new understanding of what human life should be like. Some of them are preserving these qualities even if we speak about a later time, mosaics or paintings. But my task was here to try to draw your attention to how, as I'm repeating Andrew's words, similar and different the images are at the same time. Yes, we see that they are mostly using very simple patterns. They're not pretending or not trying to be very realistic. At the same time, the approach to the image is very similar. The understanding of what the image should be toward our life compared to our life values is very similar to what we have. Well, this can be said first of all about the first icons and first frescoes. Some of them are very realistic. I'm sure most of you have already seen this image hundreds of times. And yes, we are speaking about iconography, which reminds a lot kind of a portrait. Portrait of Christ. Portrait of Peter, Paul, or whoever else. And that was a very special time. Because in this very special time, art started developing, and lots of people not only wanted to see the images, but also created these images. And here we come to a very special situation, because images do exist now for a number of years. There are no official documents which would church make clear attitude toward the image, so should it be used or not, anything like that. And we have lots of artists working for the church. But if we start talking about the first centuries after the official recognition of Christianity, we may also speak about lots of people converting to Christianity sincerely, but also converting to Christianity officially only. So if you're an artist used to paint villas and wonderful landscapes and you have your daily bread, and here comes a moment when most of the city becomes Christian. And the Christian city would have different requirements now. They don't want any more landscapes. They want their walls to be decorated with images of the Mother of God and other. So what should you do? If previously you were a special painter, and your specialty was to paint different kind of pagan gods and decorations of villas, what are you doing? You're just changing your official title, so now you're a faithful Christian, but not always it would be reflected in your daily work and in your understanding of the work. And the question is that I was talking to many of my colleagues, and they agree completely that probably one of the reasons why in the history we can speak about the heresy of iconoclasm is because not all art was really the best art. And not every artist was really a faithful artist. So if we look at images like that, which say, look, this is the image of Christ. And if somebody would bring this wonderful thing to my church and would say, look, I want this image to be in the very center of liturgical space, I would say, you know, I probably would mind. Because I would not agree with this understanding of how Christ is represented on the image. Of course, it is something individual. Each of us would imagine Christ in our own way. But the way this particular carver or whoever represents Christ is, for my humble opinion, is not something which we should use in a liturgical way. So I'm thinking that maybe artists themselves created the situation when probably lots of people would say, look, instead of having an image of Christ like that, I would rather have no images. I would rather prefer not to have any particular hint, visual hint of how Christ would look like, because I don't want any mistaken understanding of the image of Christ. So, and after that time, we may speak about 200 years of different iconoclast troubles, when people were killing each other for the concept of possibility or impossibility of using the images for the church, but it really was caused by many different conditions, including the one I have just quoted, I think. So we have churches, or there were churches, which only used cross, nothing else, which now we can meet in some Protestant churches, which is also probably it's just a consequence of some bad use of images at certain time. So if you see somebody using some aspirin drugs in the wrong way, you probably will think of maybe not using them at all, rather than giving any risk of using them in the wrong way. Well, after this time, when we have churches with no images at all, which are wonderful, but they have nothing to give to your eyes during this service, we come to the moment when the church council gathers again and again and then make a decision that yes, the images can be used. But the problem is different now, because since these people have survived or have been discussing the very special problems of iconoclast period, they are thinking that images should not be tempting anymore, should not be understood as something portrait-like looking. And every single, I would say, mosaic or icon or fresco, which we have after iconoclast period, is not made the same way as it was before. The images in the church become much more abstracted, as we can say. Yes, they do remind us the human features. Yes, they do speak about the values we can notice in a human figure. But they never pretend to be as faithful to nature as the ones we had before iconoclast period. So they do have lots of common things. But images of 12th century are incomparably different by the form with the ones we had in the 6th century. So it's just a different world. Even if the content remains intact, we are no more speaking about portraits of Christ. We are starting to speak about a very special type of art, which not only in its content is different from secular, but also in the form. And Christian artists invent some very special tools, or I would say principles, which now most of people would like to call canons. So when I hear the word canon, I get frightened again, because it's so easy to say iconography is a special type of painting executed according to canons. My next question to this person is, can I read them somewhere? What are the canons are you talking about? Can you show me any source where I would be able to see what they are? I probably would also like to follow them if I would know which are them. And there are no actually canons. Yes, there are some certain and special principles in the world of iconography, but unfortunately there are no verbal things which should be written about images. And we only have very few indications from the Church Fathers how an image should look like. Well, I was pretty busy with this problem for a number of years, and at the end I came to the Seventh Nicaean Council, and I read the Acts of the Seventh Nicaean Council, which is confirming the possibility to use the images, and they have 3 different points regarding the images, 3 different practical things. First of them is dedicated to the miracles. So they describe some miracles which happened after some person entered this church and saw the image and prayed, and there's this miracle, another miracle. That's not our responsibility. The other thing which they're talking about is the technical part. And I was so happy to read about it because there are so many different discussions among iconographers. Whether should we use acrylic or tempera? Natural pigments or synthetic pigments? Should it be gesso or something else? Fresco or mosaic? So they say 2 different things, 2 phrases. First, shadows are the first friends of iconographers. Well, it means like the image starts with the drawing. And the second is, when the color comes, everything becomes much more beautiful. So that's their discussion on the technical point. They don't say how you have to learn. They don't say how many colors are you supposed to use, or, well, there are some colors, yes, mentioned. But they don't tell you exactly how much egg you're supposed to add to your paint, or should it be big or small panel, or other things like that. That was the second matter. And the third matter the Church Fathers discuss, which I consider to be probably the most important, they remember, they speak about some particular images each of the fathers would know in that church or this one, which are known for their particular power of impression. So they describe some people like, oh, there was such a sinful lady which entered that church, and when she saw that icon, her complete life was changed, and she started to lead another type of life. Or there was a special pirate who first was a pirate and sinful man, but when he saw that particular fresco or mosaic, he is transfigured completely, and he started to lead a different type of life. So I think this probably is the most important statement for iconographers, that the image supposedly should be something influencing the beholder. The image should be something which is not only giving you a possibility to feel nice or to admire how beautiful the painted things are, but it should be talking to you. It should just be something which is calculated for you to be caught by or captured by. And yes, images are all different. And sometimes with my students in St. Petersburg, I discuss like, would you be able to say which one is better? Because in previous one, we would see much more human features and much more recognizable anatomical constructions than in this one. But how it would be possible to judge whether there is any dependence on cooperation with anatomical rules, or vice versa, of making image more obstructed but more powerful. So these are very special problems. Problems of how the image should look like to work, to function, and to change the world around it, to change the beholder's life. And I'm just showing different ones in order to refresh the memories, I know most of you may have seen most of these images many times, but just to refresh and to show how different, how great variety this Christian art history had during these 2,000 years. And this was actual for people of that time, and I'm sure it was working perfectly. Well, now of course we can download everything, but we have to think of what are we supposed to choose for our own work, and how these things we have chosen have to work for our contemporaries. So, would anyone be able to repeat this image without betraying it? I'm not sure. As I said, repeating a child's story about something, being an adult, you can't just do it. You can't just bring your own interpretation without influencing the story itself. Humans are not automats. And for this person, it was natural to have his particular understanding of beauty and how the sacred of subjects should be represented. But in Christian art, they are different. The standards from the beauty are different. For Leonardo, we can speak about the natural light, we can speak about different things which are about art. But here, the concept of beauty itself is different. I would say the faces are ugly. I would say the table doesn't look like a real one. But from the other point, we can try to understand what's the main part of the image. And we would immediately come to Christ, because it's the darkest and the most important figure. Then we would try to understand what's going on here, and would also immediately get the idea of what's going on, because it's easily recognizable. So what they were worrying about is to make the image readable, to make the image powerful, and beauty can be a secondary vehicle, but not the goal. Because sometimes icons are very strange. I would say I have never seen any human being with eyes to be so close to each other. Or I would never see a human being which would have such a very strange form of the skull. But from the other hand, again, we should try to understand what was the goal. And I think we'll easily come to the conclusion that they didn't try to imitate nature or to show you the real haircut of St. Nicholas. They were just trying to bring your mind and eyes to the situation where you can concentrate in prayer and stay in a meditation without being distracted by any realistic feature. If, for example, here we have some very strange garments and very specific type of hand which is much smaller than the one which is supposedly good for this size figure, all that is made on a purpose just to keep our eyes disciplined without being distracted to naturalistic part. Well, in late Russian centuries, we can speak about lots of Western influences, especially from time of Peter the Great, who wanted to introduce the Western painting into the Russian soil, and we have lots of icons which look very realistically. But the problem is, like, the beginning of 20th century was a very special time, and by that moment we can speak about iconography in a very strange way. The icons existed, but most of them were properly dark, were almost as dark as this one, or even darker. So we can speak about the revival of iconography in the end of 19th century or beginning of 20th century, just because there were some people who started cleaning the icons up. And cleaning them up brought a very special situation. We can speak about the Trinity because this was cleaned up in the 20th century. Well, do you see anything here? I do not. And that was the normal state of all icons which were painted in medieval time just because of some technical issues. at the end of the work, most iconographers used to seal these paintings with oliva or linseed oil, which darkens with time. So you finished your work, you have sealed it, you brought it to the church, it looks nice, but after 20 years or 30 years, it darkens. So the parish priest or somebody else applies one more layer of the same linseed oil, and it gets a little brighter, but with 20 more years, it darkens twice more. So at the end, it may happen that you have a black board. Under these layers of varnish, there might be something bright and wonderful, but you will not see it. And I would say that we can speak about Rublev, but we cannot speak about the centuries between Rublev and us, because the Trinity used to be covered with varnish for years and centuries, and they didn't know it. They didn't actually, well, they had it, but they didn't know what they had. And, well, this is 19th century icon, and even in these few years, it darkened so much. What we can say about things of 16th century. I wouldn't recognize anything in these dark outlines, and I would never believe there's something great behind if I wouldn't be a restorer. Well, I'm not, but anyhow. And the question is that revival of iconography, we have to say thank you to the scholars and scientists who started studying it, who started studying medieval art and trying to clean up what they had in churches. Because if you have a Trinity like that, painted by Simon Ushakov, and even this was darker originally, they have cleaned it up, but they tried to scratch a little bit the surface, and they come to a special situation when under the 17th or 18th century, they find the 14th. In many cases, restorers say that they have a kind of multi-layer pie where you have 19th century, 17th, 14th, 12th, something like that. So you have many icons in one. Just because they didn't want to make another board, they were painting on the top of it. And it happened many times that we discovered lots of icons under some paintings made later time. So that was such a fascinating process, I believe, in the beginning of 20th century or end of 19th, that lots of artists started to be inspired with the medieval art. We know about Vasnetsov or many others who really paid attention to what was made in Byzantium and other countries, and they were trying to introduce these values of medieval art to their own works. So in this, I think these are sketches probably, I'm not sure. The quality of photograph is so bad, I'm so sorry. But I would say, at least in this one, you will see some particular qualities which are appropriate for medieval art. So local colors and no particular desire to create naturalistic space behind these paintings surface. So we're going to speak about revival of medieval principles. And after this sketch, we see the real church painted, and we do see lots of wonderful images created at that time, end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. Well, this period of time used to be named like Art Nouveau or something like that. And we have some images in Russia of this time, but unfortunately we had the revolution. In all this, which could be a good going process, went lost. But okay, let's go forward and see some good things. This church was recently restored. It was built in 1913, Novodevichy Monastery in Moscow. And this is one of examples of how these artists of that time started to work. They were taking medieval patterns and they were trying to transform them in a way that it would probably from a first glance look medieval, but when you start analyzing the form, how is it treated, how these forms are built, you will understand it's a new thing. It's not medieval anymore. The same church inside, and a very particular thing, it's actually a recently made photograph. There is some gilding on the top, some riza or whatever, but the icons are dark. The icons are dark because that's how they imagined them to be in the beginning of 20th century. They used to see them dark, and they made them dark. So the particular quantity of gold is just kind of compensation of darkness of the icons. Well, this is Patriarch Cyril celebrating this in church, and you see, icons compared to real people are much more dark just because, I'm repeating, they were thinking they're supposed to be dark at that time. Oh, sorry. And paintings are made at this time. Yes, they are new because they were not trying to make something fast. This is the same church. Where it is. Well, these are, yes, the Annunciation. Okay. Well, we can even speak about the situation when the state sponsored the development of Christian art. Because this man was a wonderful and a genius artist, I would say, and he created lots of different drawings and invented lots of different ideas for the use of the church. And they even had an enterprise, which is named Olovanishnikov, something like that, and they produced lots of stuff for churches where they combined patterns from medieval time, early Christian time, and 19th century. Like here, we have a completely flat surface with some patterns and a realistically painted image of Christ. So this could never happen before because they were never trying to marry so different qualities of imagery. And they invented new things. They were always using old patterns, but modifying them and trying to use them in a new way. That's a method of many contemporary architects I know, but not for iconographers. But let's go forward and see. So, typical iconosis they were projecting. Icons are dark, just because they used to see them dark. And after the time, yes, we know what happened. And we all know what was special situation afterwards, and what were the people who were doing it. So now we can only speak about the immigrants. So because most of our iconographers, or those who are trying to do something, immigrated. And we speak about Grigory Krug and a special man who built this triangular church. That's a very special project. It's somewhere not far from Paris. And it's really triangular because of the Trinity, so it's all full of symbols. But for me it's important that because the frescoes were made by Grigory Krug. And I think it's probably one of the most important iconographers of 20th century and most powerful man. Because first of all, we can say that he really followed the tradition. But from the other hand, we understand that he exploited new methods and new expressive means because nobody before would do things the way he was doing. Well, actually this church in the countryside, and they have very little money and they have very bad conditions, but before it gets destroyed, we can take at least some pictures. And there is another Russian church in Paris, but it was previously kind of garage, which was transformed into a church. And there are many spaces like that. They're very simple, they are very authentic, and in their icons, they are trying to be traditional as much as they can. But being contemporary humans, they cannot deny what they know. They cannot deny their own background, and they just try to make this background obey the tradition, but not cancel it completely. So the icons we have, or frescoes we have from their time and their society, are very special because they do show the research for spirituality in contemporary world. The research for spirituality not only in its content, but possibility to find a way to express it in the form. And that's how we can value the works they make. We do understand how serious research was made, not to make some particular, I would say, professional way of making things, not to learn how to create a perfect icon, but to think of how the icon can be powerful, how can it work. And I would say every image we would see from Uspensky or Krug is different, and I just will use the word working because that's what it is made for. He was not worrying much about the accuracy or trying to be very similar to the prototype because they didn't have books with colored illustrations. They didn't have possibility to use internet to find out the models. They only had very narrow sources, and what they could use, they tried to use modifying or transforming into something new which would be working for their circumstances. Well, this is the Trinity by Grigory Krug, and let's go on and let's see another lady. Oh no, that's yeah, well, let's go forward. I just wanted to show you some different faces to demonstrate and to refresh in your memory maybe. I'm sure some of you may have already seen it many times, of what were the main purposes of this artist, of this iconographer. What did he try to do? Because in every situation we may express ourselves in many different ways, and the way we express ourselves says about the intention. So what were the intentions of his person? I think these are most spiritual intentions we could find on earth. Well, that's another church which actually was the garage I was showing, with the light from the top. And again, we see some gold, and mostly the icons are dark. Behind the iconosis, there's a painting made by a special person whose name is Joanna Reitlinger. And part of her life she lived in Paris, part of her life she lived again in Russia. And that was another example of how a person who studied as a secular artist tried to modify her skills, her practical understanding of art in a way to conform it to the iconography, to the requirements of iconography. And there are lots of her icons, but they're mostly very small, and we know that she mostly was making them for free as gifts to the parishioners of Father Alexander Main or other people like that. So that's one of examples of how the art can serve the liturgy in the 20th century, but that's a rare case. I think I have a part of the lecture repeating. I'm sorry. Just before the lecture I was making some changes. Yes. So let's return to Russia, because we didn't have many churches anymore, but we still had some restorers who received lots of icons from these churches. And they started cleaning them up. And one of the people who was helping them, unfortunately this photograph is taken not in the young years, but in 1990s, no, yes, in 1990, Juliania Sokolova was something about 18 years old, and she was helping restorers to restore the Trinity. Actually, I'm showing this picture as a funny thing, because even in the beginning of the 20th century, existed a possibility to take color photographs. There is a man, his name is Alfred, yeah, anyhow. And these beginning of the 20th century photographs would show us the Trinity. So here is the Rudolph's Trinity, the way you would see it if you would enter the church. Would you see anything? Not much. And if you would even come closer, you would see something like that. Would you see anything? Not much. So the treasures of our predecessors were hidden under Rizas, under the linseed oil, and other overpaintings. So this time, at the beginning of the 20th century, was such a revival time, discovering such great treasures, that Juliania, a young girl at that time, was under great influence. And that's one of her first icons, and I'm sure she painted it after participating in the process of revealing the Trinity. And I'm sure that being such a young girl, she was so impressed that this process itself has modified all her understanding of life. And she decided to dedicate her life to revival of the liturgical art in Russia. Well, at least she dedicated herself to liturgical art. She was making different kind of sketches. She was trying to make research because, again, no books, no color books, first of all, no photocopying machines, no internet, no hard drives, nothing which would help anybody to draw or to paint an icon. So, step by step, she started gathering some material. She was part of different kinds of, well, they were traveling to these remote churches to make some kind of copies. This was really a research. And by the end of the World War II, they decided to reopen the Zagor's monastery, the Lavra, Troitsi Lavra, and she was allowed to have a little circle of followers whom she was trying to teach what the liturgical art should be. So she was using her sketches, which are just working sketches, nothing more than that, and she was doing her best explaining what the icon should look like, what the icon should work like. And we should really appreciate what she did in her time, which was impossible Soviet time, because nobody was doing anything like that. She was a unique person who was brought on her little shoulders such a great task. But here we also have to speak about a little issue which later became a great problem. Because when she started her work, she was part of the Society of Secular Artists. She was educated secular artist, especially at the beginning of the 20th century. We know lots of special ideas they had. We can speak about cubism or other isms like that. And when she started teaching people in her little society, he kept saying the same phrase. He kept saying, an iconographer, if you want to be a real one, you have to kill an artist in yourself. Well, I later talked to some people who were her followers, and they were approving me that this phrase, which unfortunately is repeated many times in her memorials, in some very few texts she has left, this phrase, when she was saying that, would mean that iconographer would have to deny his own will in order to be a real and good instrument of the church. An iconographer who should only use his skills for the church art the way it should be working and not pretend to know anything better than was created before. But the followers which were listening to her maybe were listening too carefully, and they only followed her words and not her deeds. So what we see in her works, first of all, or not first of all, no, that's the wrong thing, but anyhow, if we start looking at the image, if we put it in a church, it would be visible from a very long distance. It would be visible in a very dark church, and we can easily distinguish the figure. We would see that the figure is not just a pattern painted over some traced lines, but we would understand a great care and, I would say, respect, which the iconographer was showing toward the figure. She didn't have an already pattern at her head. She researched to create this figure, and that was an individual task. Every icon of hers is different, because even if the technical part may be very similar, she worked hard to make each of them special, to make each of them top. And the sketches she was making, she only considered them to be kind of didactic material, helping her students to understand how the things are built, how the drawing should be created in order to explain. And she never meant them to be cartoons for painting, as also medieval drawings like that were never meant to be cartoons, to be copied and painted on the top, because they were just kind of Wikipedia reminding you how, I don't know, some Trifon or some Mamant would look like. So these were helping tools. These were images made during the working process or as a research study to help the followers to understand how the form should be treated, how the color should work, and so forth. But the problem is that out of these special schemes she created, the followers, and I would say generation of the followers, transformed into patterns which were supposed to be special tools for training perfection in drawing and painting. So comparing things which we have seen made by Giuliani, I would say this is an absolutely perfect drawing process, but lacking anything human. And this lack of human brings very special results, because when training to draw and paint an icon becomes a special training for the technical part only, we only know how to make it technically. So students of our Institute of Theology of Sacred Arts, for example, dedicate lots of time on the first year cloning different kinds of motifs from the icons and creating this type of image, which is an icon without an icon. So it's a motif from an icon, but it has nothing to do with it. And to say the truth, it would probably look more like a design of different kind of mountains or buildings or trees, rather like a real drawing or painting which we may see. And as a result, in this school, which they founded after her name, after her, we see lots of large works, lots of icons which are wonderfully executed from point of view of technique. So I'm not sure she did have any access to so much gold, or I'm not sure she ever was thinking about making such a huge icon for such an amount of money as these people probably had, but the situation is different. So if we start comparing what were her main values and the main values of her followers, I think we will really and clearly understand how different these worlds are. For her, I would say yes, she obeys the church fathers and she is trying to make the image work, to influence and to communicate with the beholder for prayer. The one on the other side, I would say it is good. It is nice, it demonstrates a lot of technical skills, but I'm not sure that behind the technical skills there is something more. And in Russian there's a proverb like, you don't see the woods behind the trees. I don't know if it exists in English. Something similar. So they have lots of students, they have lots of different projects, lots of gold. And they are famous, they are great, they are considered to be the greatest school in Russia. But I would say that really there is some difference, because her works are humble. They are not just humble, but they are trying to approach the sacred subject with a great respect. And those who go after her have access to every kind of image ever existed on the earth. I've been to their studio, each of them has a computer. Each of them has a special little working place, but with a computer attached to it. So it looks like a scientific lab, with the only problem that the result which they have is totally different. So I'm not sure she was really worrying about denying an artist. She really denied some of her own will or her predecessors, like secular artist methods. But I'm sure, and I see, that this person did really deny any artistic skill or understanding what the image should work like. And recently I found this image of Christ, and I said, oh, Olga, come on here. I found a great iconographer of our time. Please come on here. And she said, yes, we probably should meet this person if he lives in Russia, because it's not very often that instead of working technically, as we may see on that image, somebody tries to do some special work which is rather talking to the beholder or applying to the beholder rather than executing some certain steps. But after that, well, I was just reviewing a collection of newly imported images. I love downloading images from my friends, and I clicked the space bar, and I see the next one, and I say, oh no. I just say no because that is the way he was taught to work, or she. So before this moment, this person worked the way he or she was feeling it has to be done. So every effort was applied to make the image work and communicate with the beholder in order not to bother you with excess of information. So when we look at it, we first of all and only would see the eyes. Nothing around that would bother our attention and try to attract any attention of ours, just because everything is secondary. But when we see the finished one, we see that every detail wants to become first. Every detail wants to be on the first place and to show how wonderful blue, or how good gilding, or how, and so forth, or how nice highlights they are. And it's lost. So it's a great problem, because iconography in many schools is taught in this way. You take the drawing, you apply the first layer, you apply the second and third, and at the end you have guaranteed result, which has certain number of highlights and shadows and other things, and you have a diploma, which would indicate you're a great iconographer, well, maybe not great, but professional one, and that's it. So I start crying when I see things like that, because it really may bring you a result like that. And actually, I communicated with this man, and I wrote him a letter. I found this maybe 10 years ago, maybe more, and I wrote him a letter and said, you know, that probably these sacred subjects are probably not the appropriate, I don't know, for a mouse. And he said, you know what? You know who am I? I said, no. He said, I'm the 7th generation iconographer. And who are you to teach me how to paint? So, well, I didn't continue. Of course, I tried, but I didn't come to anything. And I remember that he actually couldn't be 7th generation iconographer, because those villages who before revolution were producing icons in dozens, in Soviet time were transformed into black boxes industries, and mostly were making the decorative patterns, decorative motifs. So he says 7th generation, yes, maybe he had predecessors who were making icons and some who were making black boxes, and then he started again to make some sacred subjects. But well, I'm talking about technique, and technique may bring you to this kind of result, unfortunately sometimes. Well, yes. But if we look at what our predecessors were doing, or at what people were inspired by in the beginning of 20th century, end of 19th century, and what is so special about iconography? What makes the icon to be so special? I would say it's such a deep lake. It's a sea, it's an enormous ocean, which is really hard to understand. And the problem is that if we try to interpret this deepest sea in the world with our vision, which we can see from our own point of view, it may become a kind of comic representation of what the original image was meant for. Or I would say, if probably some toy producer would decide to create a toy with Mona Lisa's face. So for me this comes to the concept of a similar understanding, because in this case I would find more than 100 different words to indicate the depth, the power, the spirituality of the content of the image. And in this case, I would just say, it is nice. It is sweet. I wouldn't say it's beautiful, but I would just say these two words, nice and sweet. And in many cases, it really happens when iconographers who are taught the technical skills, who are taught how to execute their work, start doing their job and do what they're supposed to do. The problem is that they probably were never taught to look. They were never taught to think of what makes the image work. They see, okay, I see the green here, I see the yellow, the orangish, and I probably don't have this yellow, I'll substitute to something else. And the hair, it may have been this way. Good, okay, I'll do it. Well, I can tell you, yeah, let's say here. Some years ago, I happened to be in Finland. They have an Orthodox seminary in Joensuu, and they have a church maybe a little smaller than yours, which was painted by some Greek iconographer. And it was actually painted on canvas, and they imported it from Greece and glued it up on the walls. But while I was there at the service, again I started crying. I'm usually not much crying, but that time I was, because I saw, unfortunately I don't have the photographs, I think it's probably destiny, I don't have them, that the man who was painting images, it's a different one, but just to indicate something, I would say I had an impression that if you would ask him, who for you would be Archangel Gabriel? He would say, Archangel Gabriel, he is 15 brush strokes. That's it. And who for you would be St. John Chrysostom? 85 brush strokes. Done. So what I saw in this church was a very brave execution of certain technical thing, because technically you can draw very quickly, very slowly, you can draw with different kinds of moods. But what I saw there is that understanding of the image is not about who is painted, but what about how you're supposed to perform it. The way you perform your activity as an iconographer is the most important thing. I don't know. Well, I have a friend who is a theologian, and I think if you would ask him who is Archangel Gabriel for him, he would spend hours describing. He would say 1,000 different words, which will be not very brave, which will be humble and respectful, and very slow words, because he wouldn't know how Archangel Gabriel would look like, or how should we describe him in 15 brush strokes. So that's what I think one of the most important troubles of our time. Otherwise, we may have another situation. Like this is a beautiful icon which you may see in Washington, D.C. And here is a version of contemporary iconographer who trying to be creative. So we do see that the throne, which didn't look well, he was substituting something else. And he also substituted the garment because it didn't look good enough. Dirty maybe. And he also substituted the color of the garment of Christ and changed it completely. And now my question is, if you would compare these two images, would you say the red looks nice here or not? Would you say red looks nice? Sure. Okay, what about the yellow and the blue? What about this combination?
It's interesting, they work together in contemporary terms when you think of color contrast like that one.
Yes.
That's more power than red.
That has more
That
power.
you see Christ.
So if you speak about power, maybe we should not use the word nice. Yes. So I think in this case, he was thinking of how to make this image powerful. And that one was thinking of how to make this look nice. Even trying to be creative, in the creation process we have choices. And the choices we make are very important because they reveal our intentions. Artists cannot lie, because if in text you can copy and paste, here, whatever you do with your hand, you just do and everybody will see it. If you didn't sleep enough, but you're working okay, it will be maybe visible, maybe not, but it's important what result you have. And the intentions which you have are all clear. Another case, we have an image, we have a church painted in 1913, since in Petersburg. It's a part of it. And some of the images were very damaged, and we had a team of local restorers who started to do their work. So what happens if you're trying to do something good? You may have probably the best intention in the world, but you don't really know how technical things are done. Because this man or woman was not only a skillful artist who knew how to do things, and not only a spiritual person. He was both at once. So he knew how to create a spiritual image and applied all his efforts to make it. So he knew visual literacy, which would allow him to achieve this result. And this was trying to do his best with whatever he had and whatever experience he had. You see what you see. Well, I probably should stop on saying some negative things, and I like saying some more positive things because I'm rather about positive. And I'm introducing some contemporary iconographers whose works I think to be good and whose, I would say, efforts are probably have good directions. That's what I think to be the most important thing, because the work we all are doing is limited by our possibilities, but is not limited by our intentions. So we may have wonderful intentions but not be able to realize them, or we may wish just to realize something beautifully without having any special intention. And that's probably the main issue about the iconography. So we can mention some people who do images like that, who used to take patterns from books and execute them the way everybody is working. But this man, I occasionally found his work, and I know where he is, not only makes traditional images, but sometimes from time to time, he also tries to paint something very special, very strange, where I would say amount of work is incomparable. Yeah, so we can speak about, I don't know, hours, days, or maybe weeks to complete this one. And this could technically have been done in half an hour, I don't know, whatever. But I want to bring you the images which would show the desire of the authors not only to fulfill the task and then to get money and go home, but to create something which will be talking to the contemporaries. And this man, I think, has achieved some certain result in this work and another one. There is another person who was born, I think, in 1948. He's not very famous, but we're trying to do everything we can for him to get famous. And not only this man brings together the contemporary understanding of form with these birds and other things, but trying to melt together the traditional elements, the traditional understanding of how concentrated or disciplined the image should be, together with the decorative moments which are no more decorative for him. So we have lots of different things, but the way he coordinates all these wonderful instruments in his orchestra keeps the main value work first. So first of all, our attention is directed to the face and the eyes, and all the rest is just a secondary help to keep our mind and view in concentrated state. And some more of his work, well, this is the same one, I just love showing it. Yes, Maron and Kiss, no, Tikan. And I'm sure we may notice lots of traditional understanding of the form, but the way it is used, the way it is combined, I think is just very thoughtful. He had lots of time to think before moving around all these objects, all these details, and putting together all these elements. And there's another couple. Arina is painting icons, and Sergei is the man who is making carving, so he's wood carving. So this is hers, And that's a church. They actually have been making the interior iconostasis for 8 years. They have almost finished it, but there are some issues. But anyhow, I just want to show you different photographs. Unfortunately, the space is very narrow, so the church is rather large than long, so we can't take the picture of entire iconostasis. And I want to draw your attention how on the first glance you will see, yes, I have seen something similar to that. I may have seen something in the museum which would remind me that exactly. But when you start looking at it, you will understand with how much discipline and understanding this technical part is executed. So yes, we do have some gold, but the gold is not distracting our attention from the face. It remains a secondary thing. We do have some color, even bright one, but the brightness of the color is not trying to pull the blanket. We only see well-balanced and properly working images just because they were made this way. And the frescoes on the top are really so pale as you see them here. So they are made as not to compete with the icons and to keep the understanding of the space light enough. She tried to keep the situation in this church not overwhelmed by the imagery. That's why she has chosen some almost white background to keep it really light. That's some Romanian master whose only one work I have. I don't know why I'm showing it, but I just wanted to say that even if you would decide to deny every kind of artistic rules, you can only work the eyes even without the rules. So the problem is that most of our contemporaries have learned some technical rules, but they're not thinking of what these rules are supposed to apply for. This is a Serbian man. I'm not sure if it's his full name, but I have seen some of his images, and I'm going to show them. Lots of things would remind us traditional work, but some of them would still tell us that's something new, something maybe too fresh for the traditional understanding. And this man was a teacher of another Serbian iconographer, whom I'm going to show now. So I don't say, through all these images I'm going to show you, and I will show you now, I'm not trying to say these are the best in the world, these are the most acquired or the most skillful. No. I'm just trying to show some efforts, some researchers, to make the iconography live in our time, in our space. And this man's name is Todor Mitrovic, and he lives in Serbia. Well, some of his icons are very small, some are bigger. And he was also educated as a secular artist. Well, a couple of years ago he had an exhibition of 83 icons like that, and now I'm showing some of them. He tries to make iconography respected, not only from the church, because he does have some church fathers who respect his work, but also from the world of contemporary art. And the exhibition he had it in a contemporary art gallery, and it really had some good success. So that he thinks his task is to try to bring iconography become an actual art, working a very powerful art. He doesn't say again he found recipe and he can guarantee the success, but he's trying to find a way to make iconography become contemporary, to make it work. Well, some of them I think are really great, especially this one dedicated to Saul, or Paul, by the way, to Damascus. Saul, why are you persecuting me? Or he also has, this one he's baked in St. Petersburg while we invited him into Symposium. And he actually is printed one book and going to publish another one as part of his PhD. He has made one drawing, he has made the photocopies of it, 42. 42 photocopies, and each of them developed in different ways. So if you were an iconographer, you probably would have some school where they would teach you, okay, only this color you're supposed to use forever for your faces, or only that color. No. So he tried to break this pattern. Well, in book, unfortunately, they included only 17. But generally speaking, he developed 42 faces out of the same drawing. And that's, yes, some more of his works. He just somehow loves the Egyptians and Israelis escaping from Egypt. And that's one of his latest ones. But I was criticizing him because this is maybe too sharp. Or if at least he would put maybe 2 of them, 2 more, that probably would be working better. Again, I'm not saying that these images should be in every church, and they should not. But anyhow, the iconographers should be like, should try to be, well, this one we actually have at home. It's probably 4 times smaller size. And they must be working in a way that the icons should not be considered as traffic signs. Oh, this is Vladimir Sky, I've seen it, okay. Oh, this is John the Baptist of this time, I know him. So icons are art. Icons are the way to communicate and not just the patterns we're supposed to perceive for a second. 2 years ago in Moscow, we had an exhibition where they invited iconographers as well as some secular artists trying to deal with some sacred subjects. It was a very interesting experiment, especially because nobody was trying to scandalize or to show off. There was kind of cooperation. So iconographers learned how new could be the things, and the secular artists were trying also to cooperate in form of the space and the sense of liturgical context. So these are this is my work, Olga's work, and we'll go forward. And now I'm showing only our works, because I really thought we are limited in time, and I was afraid we may not have enough time. Some of them were part of the exhibition 2 years ago, some of them were not. Different. Again, the best compliment I heard from someone who is a scholar and art critic. This person said, I like your works and I see you can do better. So that's the best thing I have heard. Yes. Because the main issue we think is that you learn technical procedure and you keep continuing to do things the way you were taught without really thinking how different things could be. So this was like 4 years ago, my work? No, maybe more. And this is something like 2 years ago. I'm not really sure even this is supposed to be an icon or not. Actually, the name of the exhibition in Moscow was Gifts for the Christmas. And they called me and said, look, we have exhibition Gifts for Christmas. What do you think? What do you make? I said, okay, they're carrying some gifts for Christmas. So it's an image, which was also an experiment. And this icon started a kind of series of different images dedicated to the humility of Christ, especially related to some particular events going on in Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, about 3 years ago. And well, there are different ones, and I do really hope that main quality is that they are different, and we keep staying fresh. Well, she's not here with us, but she's working now. She's working, and that's what she's doing now. And some of all this works. And really the main thing is that the Christian art of 21st century has to be moving forward, has to be fresh, and has to discover new possibilities. Not denying all what had happened before, because this technique is a really a gesture, and people say, oh, you invented it. No, no. It was 12th century, very well diffused technique, which we just reintroduced, and many other colleagues are using it now. But many things are just to be brought back with a fresh understanding. Gold, oh, wonderful, but you should be aware of how much gold you need. Because recently, last 2 years, we were almost using no gold. And I'm sure the images we were making without gold are not worse than the ones which we had with gold. So this is really a gesture again, and this probably is the actual size of the, yes. This is very large. So fortunately, we had in our biography the possibility to study in Fine Art Academy, and we do have some workshops. So teaching workshops give us the possibility to be independent from the clients. And sometimes we have, thanks God, some time when we have no orders and we can dedicate the time to researches, to the experiments, and to thinking of how the icon may work in this circumstances or that circumstances. And that's really a great blessing. Blessing to be free, blessing to try to find out new ways. This one was recently purchased by Virginia Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., and actually they invited us to make an exhibition in their seminary, Anglican seminary, for October. So after a while, I hope we'll establish the dates before we bring some more images here. Yeah, these are the details. So we probably, in some cases, would simplify some things too much, but that's made in order just to break the pattern of recognition, just to remind us that the Annunciation, first of all, is not a set of details. It's a particular historical event. It's a part of the sacred history of the Church. And we should perceive it in a fresh way and not look for patterns in the past instead of it. And yeah, that's we are trying to hang it. And that's the one she's made a couple of days ago because we have some commission for Cambridge, Our Lady of Walsingham. So she's thinking about that now. And they have different Christmases because it's totally likes Egyptians. She likes Christmas. And this one I thought Christmas because it's Isaiah. And the three Magi coming to the mother God to bring the gifts. And this is the one you may see in the church here, and that was actually a great temptation or a great challenge, rather, because the gold is such a powerful thing, and it's so easy to make the gold make the main work, not leaving anything to the painting part. So she said, I've spent like 2 weeks or more just for thinking process and sketches of how to make these two parts cooperate, the painted part and the gilded part. Because, well, no, that's bad. In gilding, it not only is rich, but it's also so strong and expressive that it is overwhelming. And to compete with the gold, you cannot make the image too equal to it. So that was the reason why the face was made so dark. Looking to the face, you just have to switch completely in a different direction to perceive it and not to think about gold anymore. So that's why the face is made so strong. Here gilding, well, that was many years ago. Here gilding also exists, but I hope it is faded enough not to bother. Well, different things, different periods. Each of them I can describe much time, but I'm sure that the most important is not of how many efforts you apply, but how really you wish your talk to be obedient to the tradition and not talking for yourself like, oh look, that's my new version of image of Christ. No. The problem is that our predecessors were never cloning their images because they used to have different circumstances. Like for this church, this iconostasis, you have different proportions than for another church. In this case, you have lots of gold. In this case, you don't have enough means for the gold, and you have some other icons in the neighborhood which have no gold, so why should you use it? Obeying to the circumstances is a wonderful thing which makes you create. Every new circumstances bring you some new situation and make you think in a new way. And that's a great freedom. That was actually also an Anglican church in New Jersey, and that was 10 years ago. And I'm really proud of how I made it not to be too strong. I made it to be well blended in the architecture and not requiring too much attention. So the best compliment I heard from the parishioners, it looks like it is always here. It looks like it's been here for forever. And here is the other project I'm having now in front of me when I'm going home. That's it. Well, it was, when I started thinking, it looked like that. And now it looks like that. It's a very little space, and they want only the altar area to be decorated. So made a kind of, sketch, which may be demonstrated. So it's not a big thing, but the main issue again is to make it work, but not to be too strong, not to pretend to be too strong in order to give you peace for prayer. Because icon is a tool which is supposed to be an instrument for prayer. It should not be trying to tell you how to pray. It should just give you a possibility to stay in front of God and to pray. And that's why we think we have to make so much efforts to learn how to do it, to continue researches, to find how to make a better piece. Thank you for attention.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. That was a fascinating lecture. How wonderful to be given a history lesson from the very beginning all the way through to things being painted last week. Very, and on the topic of tradition, I very much enjoyed how you illustrated the fragility of tradition by illustrating some of the cases where it can fall too far in one direction or the other. The sort of decadent extremes of the Art Nouveau period in Russia versus the opposite extreme of sort of stifled academic convention that is very commonly seen among icons painted in Russia and Greece nowadays, and finally showing us these especially innovative iconographers who are pushing that boundary, sometimes pushing it too far, but with the intent of helping us to understand what painting really looks like when it becomes alive again and free. And I really appreciate that. We'll take a break now. We have a lot of time scheduled at the end for questions and answers, so I think we'll just put that off until then. And we have refreshments here. And
let me make one announcement. You all stand while I'm making the announcement if you like. We're going to ask the blessing on the food, and then let me encourage you and invite you to enjoy our courtyard and gardens. It's a beautiful day to enjoy your food and drink there. Please don't take any food or drink into the church, however. The bathrooms, there's one here. There's a door on both sides. Lock both doors if you go in there, or you might be surprised. There's also a bathroom on the other side of the narthex as well, okay? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thou hast ascended in glory, O Christ our God, granting joy to thy disciples by the promise of the Holy Spirit, through the blessing they were assured, that thou art the Son of God, the Redeemer of the world. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Father, bless
the food and drink shall these thy servants, for thy holy, always now and ever, and unto the ages of ages.
Amen.